Two gas station attendants are murdered. A 17-year-old drifter confesses to the crime.
He just saying, please, man, please don't. It's pissing me off. I pulled both triggers on him.
Were these the words of a killer?
No jury that has heard that tape has ever said not guilty.
Or was this a teenager in way over his head?
I walk in there an hour and a half, walk out convicted of capital murder.
When you have someone say, I killed that man, bam. At least in southern Alabama, you get convicted.
Depending on whom you believe, Michael Pardue is either a charismatic scoundrel who spent 28 years in prison as an innocent man, or he is a killer and a con man whose latest scam has won him his freedom. Either way, his story is bigger than his character or the crimes for which he is accused. And it shows that sometimes protecting the procedures of the law is more important than any one person's guilt or innocence. February 15th, 2001. A seasoned convict is set free after 28 years. Michael Pardue embraces his wife, Becky, whom he married while in prison.
Without her belief in truth and love, we wouldn't be here today.
I knew I was getting out the minute I got in the car with my wife and drove off. I was not certain of it a second before that. The instant the door closed on our car, and my wife put the transmission in forward and we rolled forward, I knew I was going home and I was free then.
This was no ordinary release. The man, with the help of his wife and attorneys, waged an unprecedented legal battle against the state of Alabama. They managed to overturn multiple convictions against him, including 3 for murder. But the debate still rages. Was Michael Pardue wrongfully convicted or guilty of the murders he confessed to committing nearly 3 decades earlier? It began May 22nd, 1973, in Mobile, Alabama. Mobile is an old shipping port, known to be rough around the edges. Even so, at the time, murders were rare. At around 2 a.m. near the waterfront, police responded to an emergency call from Tony's gas station. A customer had found the corpse of 20-year-old attendant Ronald Ryder. The station had been robbed, and Ryder shot in the head at close range with a shotgun. His killer or killers had gotten away with $58 from the cash register.
The man was terribly murdered for a very small amount of money. The man was killed pretty quickly. A lot of blood.
By sunup in the nearby town of Saraland, the AA gas station had also been hit. The attendant there was 68-year-old Will Harvey Hodges.
He was a shell-shocked veteran from World War II, and he was a very timid type, afraid of thunder and lightning. He wouldn't put up any kind of confrontation to hold back the money or anything like that. I'm sure when they walked in, he gave them whatever money he had.
The robbers had been merciless. Hodges also had been killed by a shotgun blast to the head. Given the similarities between the 2 murders, police were convinced the crimes were connected. Within 3 days, authorities believed they had solved the crimes. They secured a confession from a 17-year-old vagrant with a record for petty theft and check forgery named Michael Rene Pardue.
I don't know why I shot the dude on it. No, it's just, I know I didn't pull the trigger on purpose. And it pissed me off.
On the tapes, Pardue explained that he had spent the night joyriding in stolen cars with a 16-year-old female acquaintance when they decided they needed some cash.
She said, we're going to get us a little money, a little service station holdout. And at the time, I don't know why or anything else. I mean, just, wow, man, this is cool. Just like stealing a car. or little grand larceny, or burglary or something, you know.
And then you noticed the name of the station.
Yes, and just vaguely as a little Tony station, Thoni.
Pardue told police that during the holdup, he pointed his shotgun at the attendant. Everything was going smoothly, he said, until the man came at him with a crowbar.
The crowbar's coming right at me, you know, and I take the shotgun and block it. And when it did, it knocked the shotgun down and went off. And I didn't pull the triggers intentionally. The thing just went off.
While the teenager didn't take full responsibility for the first murder, for the second one, AA attendant Will Hodges, he admitted he wasn't provoked.
He just saying, please, man, please don't, you know. It seemed like every time he said please, it hurt, and then just like somebody slapping me. And then just pissing me off and off and off. And then finally, you know, I'm standing there and I still got a shotgun in one hand, my right hand. I just pulled both triggers on him.
Michael Pardue signed his name to a written confession. What could be more persuasive? And yet, he now insists it was all a big lie. The truth, he says, is that all he did that night was steal tires and joyride in hot cars. When the police mentioned murder, he claims it sounded so bizarre, he figured he could distract them by playing along.
Well, I fell into the first mode of being sort of playful. I mean, hey, these guys talking about me killing somebody, you know? Well, hell, if I play with this, you know, they're gonna forget about these tires, you know? They ain't even gonna talk to me about this. I know I ain't shot nobody, you know?
In May 1973, Mobile, Alabama teenager Michael Pardue got himself into deep trouble with the law. He confessed to murders that he would later claim he did not commit. It was no mystery why the police considered him a good suspect. At 17 years old, Pardue was well known as a wild, insolent teen, skating on the edge of disaster.
Angry, bitter, rebellious. You know, if they could tell me it was, don't go outside, it's raining, I'd go outside just to be doing it.
The year before the murders, Michael's life had spiraled out of control. His parents decided to call it quits after a long marriage gone bad.
My father was a very violent alcoholic, verbally abusive, extraordinarily explosive. He uses rage, drunk or sober, to handle problems. So usually after I got beat, my mother did.
On April 24th, 1972, his father, Thomas Pardue, came by the house to pick up some belongings.
He was intoxicated, but he was in that place where normally he's kind of relaxed, you know. Mama asked me to step outside so that they could talk. And then the gun went off twice in rapid succession. I ran in, and my father was sitting down there, and my mother was laying on the floor, there's blood everywhere. I picked up a knife, and I was going to stab him.
Michael's mother begged him to stop. Those were her last words. She died before reaching the hospital. Pardue's father was convicted of murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His brother and sister went to live with their grandmother. 16-year-old Michael was on his own. He dropped out of school, served a few months in prison on a stolen check charge, and began experimenting with drugs.
He had barely finished ninth grade. He was virtually an orphan, with his mother dead and his father in prison, and a dysfunctional family, to say the least.
Author Donald Connery researched Pardue's background for a book about the case.
He was sometimes sleeping in the woods, and he was getting into trouble, and he was arrested for possession of marijuana and alcohol.
The gas station murders took place 1 year later, on May 22, 1973. According to Pardue, on that night he was, as usual, up to no good. His 1963 Chevy Impala got a flat tire, so he says he abandoned it at the Plantation Motel and decided to spend the rest of the night stealing cars and tires with 2 friends, and that was it. He claims his troubles really began the next morning when he went to visit his grandmother.
I walk in, my grandmother, she said, "Where's your car?" First thing out of her mouth, how are you? Where did you spend the night? Where's your car? So, in my brilliance, I said, "Somebody stole it. I'm out hunting it all night." She said, "Well, if that's true, you need to call the police." And I was pissed off, so I called her bluff.
Pardue says he was now caught in his own ridiculous lie. So he called the Saraland police to report that his Chevy was missing. It quickly turned up with 2 stolen tires in the trunk. The officers, knowing the teenager, were immediately suspicious. Detectives would eventually reconstruct Pardue's movements and learn that he stole 2 vehicles from locations near the 2 murder scenes. Police called the young man and told him to come down to the station.
I walk in, nobody's treating me like anything other than a kid. Then a sergeant walks around there and said, "Mike, why don't you step over there in a little room and just hang on to some people that want to talk to you."
As the questioning began, Michael says that relaxed mood changed in an instant.
3 guys came in the door very quickly. The door actually slammed backward. The bigger of the men remarkably favor my father, physically in the way he looks, the way he dressed, in his demeanor, in his tone of voice.
That man was Mobile County Sheriff's Deputy Bill Travis, now deceased. He had a reputation for solving crimes and for being rough with suspects. Pardue claims that Travis and his fellow officers began a rapid volley of questions.
I started hearing shotgun, murder, blows head off, you're a tough man, you're evil, you're psycho, bloodthirsty, bunch of profanity. And I'm trying to sort out what's going on.
When the teenager hadn't returned to his grandmother's house after several hours, she sent attorney David Barnett over to the police station to find out what was going on.
I had handled a previous case for him, so I thought, well, no, I shouldn't be getting any real problem. I mean, they need to let me in to see him. And what I was intending to do when I got there is the first thing any lawyer in this business does or ought to do, and is get in and just say, "Shut up now."
Pardue never got that advice. As a 17-year-old, he was legally an adult and therefore responsible for obtaining his own lawyer. Authorities did not have to accept an attorney his family had sent.
Well, you could tell that it was a serious case and that they were taking it dead serious. And they basically made it real clear that I wasn't getting one step further.
For the next 4 days and nights, they hammered, they threatened. Late in the second night, they got really pissed because they started wanting some facts and I couldn't give them to them. They got very violent, kicking, punching, slapping, threatening.
Pardue says sometime on the 4th day, he finally broke down and confessed to killing the 2 attendants, 20-year-old Ronald Ryder and 68-year-old Will Hodges. It was at this point, he claims, that detectives began taping the conversation. The 17-year-old admitted to the crimes, but seemed confused about his motives in killing Hodges.
I just stopped, and said, "Man, where in the hell, what am I doing up here, And then the man just turns around and says, "Boy, what you want?" And then seen the shotgun, his eyes get real big. He just starts pulling money, handing it to me.
Pardue confessed to shooting Hodges in the head, even though the man was cooperating. He told police that after pulling the trigger, he had a vision of his father killing his mother just 1 year earlier.
Well, I looked down at the man, and instead of seeing a man's face, because I knew I just killed a man, I seen my mother's face.
It took them about 4 days to get him to the point where he would say anything, that he was just parroting what they said, and he was doing it the best he could, because he thought the better confession he'd give at that point, he was going home. They told him he would go home, and he believed it.
No indication of the beating appeared on the interrogation tape. Pardue says all of it occurred when the tape was off. The teenager was confronted with something else during his interrogation. While he was in custody, utility workers found the skeletal remains of a 43-year-old alleged drug dealer named Theodore White in an overgrown ditch. Coroners could not determine the cause of death.
So now they had another body in Mobile County, so they said he must have done that too. And by that time, he was ready to confess to killing anybody, Abraham Lincoln or John Kennedy, whoever.
Pardue confessed to White's murder as well. While Pardue was being questioned, police had arrested the man he said was with him the night of the murders, 21-year-old John Oscar Brown. In an interview taped shortly before his death in April 2000, Brown claimed the detectives, one of them in particular, treated him just as roughly as Michael Pardue.
I told him, I said, man, I ain't had nothing to do with none of that stuff. Anyway, he jumped up and got me by the hair of the head and started beating my head in the desk.
Even though he was illiterate, Brown signed a confession the officers wrote for him.
He pulled a gun on me, you know, and I just felt like if I didn't say what this guy wanted me to say, I was going to die.
Between the two men, police believed Brown was a sidekick. They surmised the leader in the killings was 17-year-old Michael Pardue. In 1973, Pardue never voiced his complaint about being physically abused during his interrogations. He now says the reason is simple. No one would have believed him. While Saraland police do not flat out deny that any physical abuse might have occurred, they call it, quote, highly unlikely. But they do absolutely deny that there was any conspiracy to frame Pardue for the triple homicide. But before any of these debates would emerge, Michael Pardue would have his day in court, or to be precise, his 2 hours. In May 1973, the arrest of 17-year-old Michael Pardue seemed to close the book on 3 suspicious deaths near Mobile, Alabama. 2 gas station attendants murdered in a single night, and a third man found in a ditch who died of unknown causes. Pardue first faced trial in Baldwin County for the slaying of Ronald Ryder. He recalls that his first meeting with his attorney didn't go well.
I say, look, man, you know, I didn't do this. He says, man, you crazy as hell. You done confessed to it. The only thing we're going to do is go over there today and they're going to sentence you and send you to prison. I said, wait a minute, I didn't do it. He said, too late, you confessed.
In court on August 14th, 1973, the state put on the stand the 16-year-old girl whom Pardue admitted he had been with the night of the murders. She said both Pardue and 21-year-old John Brown took part in the killings. Prosecutors also showed the jury Pardue's signed confession, as well as a shotgun that Pardue had led them to at his uncle's house. No ballistics tests were run to determine whether it was, in fact, the murder weapon. Prosecutors didn't even bother to play the teenager's short, taped confession. For his part, Pardue's defense attorney failed to question the integrity of the interrogation or the utter lack of physical evidence.
There was no evidence, not any evidence, No blood spots, no shotgun evidence, no fired powder, nothing in any of the vehicles in which he rode, not on him, not on his clothes, not where he slept, nothing.
Whether or not it was there or not, or whether or not they thought their case was so strong they just didn't look for it. Back then, they had an eyewitness and a confession. Who needs forensics?
The trial was over in less than 2 hours.
I walk in there an hour and a half, walk out convicted of capital murder. I mean, I'm baffled.
Baldwin County DA David Whetstone says he firmly believes the guilty verdict was correct, but does concede that there were procedural problems in how the case was handled.
When you get a situation where you have a transcript you can read in 30 minutes, it just seems too quick, and that maybe more deliberation should have gone into it.
And I'm convinced his own attorney thought he was guilty, so what's the point of even trying? In a real sense, Michael Pardue had no effective defense whatsoever.
The teenager's troubles were far from over. He still faced charges on 2 more murders in Mobile County. At that point, the district attorney approached Pardue and his attorney with a plea offer.
He says, if you want to see your 18th birthday, you sign these papers, plead guilty to this right here, today, right now. Because if you don't, I'll see you the first person to die in Alabama's electric chair. I said, looked at my lawyer, I said, what's going on? He said, do you want to die? I said, no, sir.
According to Pardue, his attorney never advised him that the U.S. Supreme Court had invalidated all the country's death penalty laws in 1972.
So Michael pled guilty to avoid going to the electric chair at a time when he couldn't have gone to the electric chair because the death penalty didn't apply.
I think he had incompetent counsel. I'm not so sure that there may have been a suggestion death was a possibility. If that was true, that would be improper.
Even so, for the family of one of the murdered gas station attendants, the convictions seemed fair.
Just the bloodthirstiness of the way he killed my uncle with very little remorse. That's the part that shows that he was, at that point in his life, a pretty despicable person that, had no morals or no heart whatsoever.
In the end, 17-year-old Michael Pardue was given a life sentence. His alleged accomplice in the killings, John Brown, was convicted of first-degree murder in a separate trial and sentenced to life in prison. Pardue ended up at the Holman Maximum Security Prison, one of the toughest in Alabama. The teenager says he had to play a role to survive.
I either played triple killer that's really crazy, or somebody would eat me alive.
He not only survived, prison gave his life a new sense of meaning.
I gained a measure of respect for the first time in my life for just being the persona I was playing. I finally found the place I belong. I could be somebody.
But after 3.5 years behind bars, Pardue had had enough. He was moved to a minimum security prison, where he volunteered to train dogs used to catch escapees. His job was to run through the woods and let the dogs follow him. One afternoon, he just kept running. He was captured after 3 days. A year later, he had devised a new escape plan. For a full day, he drank large amounts of salty water, but did not urinate. The prison doctor assumed he had appendicitis and sent him to a Mobile hospital.
He's a good con man. He can talk. And he was always able to convince people of him. That was why he was able to escape.
When I woke up, they'd done taken an appendix. There was nothing wrong with it. And they were as baffled as everybody else.
Pardue found himself handcuffed to a bed, with a security guard sleeping in a chair nearby. He managed to reach the guard's keys and make his escape. He borrowed a car from a friend and made it all the way to Texas. His downfall came when he started picking up hitchhikers.
I had a girl and a guy on their honeymoon in the back seat, and I had an old raggedy guy that was looking for a shrimp boat in the front seat, and my little childish looking self, which at the time I looked like I was about 13 or 14. And I drove by a cop in a car with an Alabama license plate, and he just says, "This does not look right. There's something wrong with that picture."
Pardue was pulled over, taken to the police station, and quickly identified by his fresh appendectomy scar.
After that 1978 escape, I realized I couldn't make it on a run. I just simply did not have what it takes to do that successfully.
So the failed fugitive decided to settle down and try to earn parole as a model inmate. He began working on the cattle ranch at Atmore Prison. In his free time, he kept up correspondence with pen pals on the outside and developed his drawing skills. In the spring of 1983, he wrote a letter to a small T-shirt design company to offer his artwork. The owner was Becky Puyadu.
I'm inquisitive by nature, and I was really very curious about the whole thing. You know, even if he were a triple killer, well, this would be pretty interesting. You know, let's look a little closer. After all, he's 60 miles away in a cage. What could be the harm?
Soon, the two were corresponding regularly. Visits followed the letters, and the seasoned inmate again began looking beyond the prison walls.
Until I met Becky, I was firmly convinced that I was designed to be in prison. That's what I was born for. I'd found peace there. Now I have got an incentive to get out of here that I never had. I wanted the hell out of here.
After each of Michael Pardue's escapes, more time was added to his sentence. Originally, he would have been eligible for parole in 1983. These additional penalties made getting out less and less likely. But the inmate now had a new ally, a woman who would do everything in her power to get her man out of prison legally. In 1983, after 2 escape attempts, convicted murderer Michael Pardue was trying for the first time to find a legitimate way out of his Alabama prison cell. The reason? Her name was Becky Puyadu.
He's tall and strong and handsome, and he's the strong, silent type. He has a very soft voice. I was just swept away. I said, "Oh, man, this is worse than I thought."
I met her, and everything changed. Man, I started living. I started seeing colors, and I started tasting things that were vibrant. Hell, old biscuits that I've been eating for a long time, and I just eat to survive. Suddenly I understood they tasted like crap, because with her, I began to live.
Pardue knew his best hope for freedom was a parole.
His prison record for over a quarter century is almost impeccable, except for escapes. He was always a hard worker. He was always courteous.
The warden began allowing Pardue to take day passes. He spent that time with his new girlfriend.
He was a triple murderer, yet he had minimum custody, and we were allowed to take 8-hour passes away from the prison.
Then state prison policy stiffened, and Michael lost his privileges.
And I've done that little childish thing. I rebelled.
On March 31st, 1987, while working as a cowhand, Michael rode away from his ranch job on horseback. He made his way to the assistant warden's house.
Nobody was there, and he took the warden's gun and the car keys, and he got in the Corvette automobile and drove away.
I run off again, showed him, look, you know, you can hurt me, but I can hurt you too by running.
Prison officials informed Becky and then monitored her in case her boyfriend made contact.
I was panic-stricken every moment, every breath. I lived with the fact that maybe he's being killed now. It turned out that he had simply gone to his father's home.
Pardue's father had been paroled after serving 7 years for murdering his wife. He was now dying from the effects of alcoholism. Pardue says he made peace with him. He was quickly recaptured and returned to prison. That third escape, together with the home invasion and gun theft, qualified Pardue as a habitual offender. This meant a new sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole and without Becky.
But that like killed us, literally. But it also gave us a depth of strength that when that judge said life without parole, we knew he was full of crap. We would not die in prison.
The couple was married at a prison ceremony on May 18th, 1988. They now set to work using the same legal system that put Pardue behind bars to try to get him out.
The state of Alabama has all the resources in the world and all the money and all the dozens of district attorneys and assistant district attorneys and prosecutors and investigators and these. It was just us. And my home that was mortgaged twice. It was he and I against the world.
Becky began gathering data on his case, while Michael studied law books in the prison library. The statute of limitations had expired for almost all of his appeals. Then, in 1994, they found an issue a judge would listen to.
The federal district judge, when he looked at what Michael's court-appointed attorney done, he wrote in his report recommendation that Mike's counsel amounted to no representation at all. None at all. And Michael was a 17-year-old, and he had an attorney who did nothing.
Whether he was a killer or not was beside the point. The U.S. Supreme Court guarantees every individual the right to a vigorous defense. In 1995, after 22 years in prison, Pardue's 3 murder convictions were wiped out due to ineffective assistance of counsel. Prosecutors in Mobile, Alabama were certain that they had the right culprit for the gas station murders the first time around, but now they were in a nearly impossible position. They scrambled to put the old case back together.
We went through several shotguns trying to find the one. We couldn't find it. We looked at the transcript. That didn't help me out very much because there was nothing there.
Prosecutor David Whetstone also found that most of the original investigators were now dead. In a last-ditch effort, Mobile County Assistant DA Tom Harrison sent investigators to comb through the evidence storage warehouse in Saraland.
Our investigators went out there and just went through it box by box, looking to see if they could find anything. And they came upon a file that had the reel-to-reel and the photographs in it, such as that, came back, and we said, thank you, Lord. We can go to trial.
The biggest surprise was the long-forgotten reel-to-reel confession tape. It was a critical find and became the most important evidence at Pardue's retrial in May 1995. On it, 17-year-old Michael Pardue good-naturedly recounts what he did the night of the murders.
I'm standing there, and I still got a shotgun in one hand, my right hand. I just pulled both triggers on it.
Nothing on the hour and 40-minute long tape indicated the suspect had been beaten or coerced while in custody.
Number 1. First class. I mean, they still treat you real nice up there. It's like a hotel, except you can't leave.
In court, the defense fought back by pointing out that several of Pardue's interrogators had faced multiple charges of corruption. In fact, over 150 complaints of coercing suspects had been filed against lead interrogator Bill Travis. Within a year of Pardue's arrest, Travis had been fired from the sheriff's office. Pardue's attorneys also insisted that their client, who was 17 at the time of the murders, was in no position to withstand any kind of sustained assault from interrogators.
Michael Pardue, at his age and coming from the background he had with that violent father of his, was not about to let them know he was scared. Bill Travis might as well have been his alcoholic, abusive father. And he knew from dealing with his father that the way you didn't get beaten was to tell him what he wanted to hear. And he did it.
You hadn't had any problem with the officer trying to harass you or threaten you?
We've heard all kinds of tales about the Baldwin County people over there, and about how impatient they are and country and all, but everybody's in line.
Pardue's case went to the jury on May 25, 1995. At least one juror had his doubts.
Didn't have a gun, didn't have anything that I remembered of showing in that courtroom except that tape confession. I said, I don't know, it's just something fishy about this.
Juror Robert Deacle says he was one of the last holdouts, but finally went along with the rest of the panel.
I said, really, I don't think you did it. The other jurors, it made you feel quite uneasy.
For a second time, Michael Pardue was found guilty of murder. Michael Pardue's confession had once again been the most crucial evidence against him. But it was the part of the confession that wasn't on the tape that would become the key to his freedom. In May 1995, Michael Pardue was convicted a second time for murdering a gas station attendant in Mobile, Alabama 22 years earlier. His attorneys immediately appealed, arguing that the critical piece of evidence against him, his confession tape, should have been ruled inadmissible. The reason, there was no direct evidence such as signed waivers proving that the then teenage Pardue had been given his Miranda warning before the interrogation began. However, the state argued that elements of Miranda appeared on the tape and should suffice.
If you decide to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you will still have the right to stop answering at any time. No promises, threats, or inducements have been made against me, and no pressure or coercion of any kind has been used against me. And that means that we hadn't worked on you too many times with rubber hose or promised to turn you loose or anything like that. You understand me?
Yes.
The Alabama Supreme Court ruled those taped statements weren't enough. There simply was no way to tell if Pardue had received the Miranda warning before he was interrogated. In August 1996, Pardue's conviction was wiped out for a second time. It was a tremendous setback for the prosecutors in charge of the cases.
Without the confession, without the gun, with the witnesses being dead, with a very short transcript, that the likelihood of conviction was almost non-existent.
The authorities soon announced that they were not pursuing another trial against Michael Pardue for any of the murders.
That's the judicial system in our country, okay? I work within that system. I'm not happy with that particular result, but I think that result was the proper judicial result.
So, we're going home, right? No, we're not going home.
Pardue still owed the state time because of his 3 prison escapes. In a hearing before the court, the prosecutor reminded the judge of this fact.
The district attorney said, Your Honor, I have 3 more priors. This man is a habitual offender. The judge said, life without parole. May God have mercy on your soul.
In May 2000, Pardue, his wife Becky, and his attorney went back to the courts and managed to get 2 of the escape-related convictions overturned on technicalities.
We're really very, very grateful that the state of Alabama is so inefficient that they cannot put together a successful conviction without making a mistake.
Now Pardue was guilty of crimes relating to only 1 escape. On February 15, 2001, in a courthouse in Bruton, Alabama, Pardue was resentenced to time served and probation.
I'm looking back at Becky in the courtroom, who is looking up at heaven, crying, and finally can't believe it. And when the judge finishes reading his sentence, he gets up and leaves the bench, and the guards grab Michael and take him out the back door of the courtroom.
They said I could go. Then suddenly, the Department of Corrections snatches me away from my attorneys, out of the courtroom, literally threw me in the vein.
Michael simply disappeared. Our attorney made it very clear Michael Pardue has been kidnapped by the state of Alabama.
Prison officials explained that there was still paperwork to be done before Pardue could be released. The defense team began making frantic calls to the governor's office. A few hours later, they got word. Pardue would be set free at a location off prison grounds.
And there were police cars and squad cars and Department of Corrections vehicles and an enormous amount of people there. And it was bizarre. And I looked around and I saw Michael. He had all his possessions in a small paper sack. All these 28 years of possessions he carried in a small paper sack. And he was alive, and he was there. And I knew at that point he was coming home.
It's an emotional moment for Michael Pardue and his wife. They hold each other tight, kissing, hugging, whispering. For the first time, there's no time limit. No one's gonna take him away.
Michael Pardue says he now plans to live quietly with his wife. Today, those who disagree with the outcome of his legal battles aren't upset that he's out of prison, but by his persistent claims of innocence.
After all those years, it wasn't a matter of that he hadn't served enough time. It was just a matter that him getting out on technicalities and him just saying flat out he's innocent. He knew how to manipulate Becky, and she knew how to fight with the system.
He did kill these people. I have no doubt of that in my mind. He has had the benefit of every break in the judicial system. You know, everything has just turned to work his way. There's no way he could have planned that out. I mean, he's not that intelligent. He has just been superbly lucky in the way things have turned.
I think this case may represent the ironies of ironies. As long as Michael Pardue acted like a thug and escaped and broke the law, he was incarcerated. But when he quit doing that and used the law to his advantage, and his wife is to be credited for the large of this, he was released. So the American system worked. When he got out of prison, he told people that if there was a lesson was to obey the law and live right. I hope that's the Pardue that's released. If that's the Pardue that's released, good things have happened.
Michael Pardue and his two alleged accomplices remain the only people ever investigated for the 1973 murders. The law applied in throwing out Pardue's taped confession was simple. For the court to allow a confession, it needs to know the circumstances in which it was made and whether it was offered fairly and freely. In the absence of that knowledge, the court chose to toss out Michael Pardue's confession. Some would say that decision was based on a technicality. But Pardue's story illustrates a key principle in American justice. When it is impossible to determine someone's guilt or innocence, under the law, that person is innocent. As the adage goes, it is better that 10 guilty people escape than one innocent person suffer.